Hello and welcome to this presentation. My name is GHULAM GHAUS CHOUDHRY and at present I am affiliated with the International University School of Medicine with short name IUSOM. In this presentation we are going to cover the ceremonies of award of Doctor of Science degree to me. The title of my Doctor of Science with brief name D.Sc degree thesis was Environmentally Significant Photochemistry of Chlorinated Benzene Derivatives, Dibenzofurans and Dibenzo-p-Dioxins. In this slide is shown the cover page of my thesis containing its title and authors, of course, my name. The second page of the thesis shows its title and other standard documentary details written in Dutch language. The third page of my thesis includes what is called usually authors, i.e. my dedications. So my thesis is dedicated to my father and especially to my mother, late, who always encouraged me for the continuity of my studies despite the occasional obstacles and hindrances. To my wife, Safia Sultana Bhatti, our daughter Gul Banu, and our son Zishan Ahmed. Finally, to God, who kept the photoreactor, gas chromatograph, mass spectrometer, and my mind in proper order, who allowed the happening of some discoveries in the field of chemistry by a person like me. By the way, the digital version of the D.Sc degree thesis cited here has been recently published and loaded at the website of the University of Amsterdam, situated in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, as well as the website of the International University School of Medicine, located in Boer, Chlorinated, Dutch Caribbean, which can be viewed and be read online by visiting one of the following sites. In this slide, we include the list of the Doctor of Science degree committee members, consisting of 7 members, which are: number 1, Professor Dr. Theo Boer, Chairman of the Doctor of Science degree committee, Professor of Mechanistic Organic Chemistry. Professor Dr. Otto Singer, my promoter, supervisor and guide. Professor of Toxicological and Environmental Chemistry. Professor Dr. Hans Serfontein, co-referent, Professor of Organic Photochemistry and Aromatic Substitution Reactions. Professor Dr. W.N. Speck-Kemp, Professor of Synthetic Organic Chemistry. Professor Dr. N.M.M. Nibring, who was Professor of Organic Mass Spectrometry. Professor Dr. U.A. Theo Brinkman, who was the Professor of Environmental and Analytical Chemistry. Finally, Dr. Kesoli, who was the research scientist in organic mass spectrometry. all the committee members, with the exception of Professor Brinkman, were from the University of Amsterdam, and Professor Brinkman was from the Free University of Amsterdam. At this stage, I would like to state that about more than 350 copies of my thesis in the form of books were published, and then which were distributed all over the Netherlands well ahead of the date of the defense of this thesis, so that if anyone in the Netherlands or elsewhere in the world had any objection to my thesis, could block the award of my degree at any stage. So this slide includes the list of 5 related ceremonies regarding the award of Doctor of Science degree to me by the University of Amsterdam, which took place on April 13, 1983, and the 5 ceremonies were as follows. Number 1, defending the Doctor of Science degree thesis in open public function. Number 2, process of awarding degree by the Doctorate Degree Committee. Number 3, reception to all guests. Number 4, dinner to some selected close friends, colleagues and family members. And number 5, celebration given in the form of party to all guests. From this point, from slide number 9 to slide number 28, we are going to cover the pictorial ceremony of defending D.Sc degree thesis in open public, which took place at Lutherse Church, in Dutch language Lutherse Kerk, belonging to the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, which took place on April 13, 1983. The total duration of the defense of my thesis was exact 45 minutes in public, and this process started at precise 3 p.m. Anyone in the audience could ask questions only and only if the Doctorate Degree Committee stopped asking me questions prior to the end of the duration, but that ugly situation never arrived. I am proud to announce that our 2 babies, namely Gul Bano, who was at that time 2 years, 9 months and 13 days old, and Zisha Ahmed, who was 1 year and 27 days old at the time, also attended this function, and thank God that luckily they remained quiet. In this slide, we show the first picture containing a view of Lutherse Church where thesis defense ceremony took place. In the first row, you can see Mrs. van der Graaf, Dr. van der Graaf, Dr. Martin Tulp, behind them visible with turned faces. On the left hand side are Mrs. Huizinga and Dr. Anders Huizinga, who was at the time editor of Trouw Dagblad, which is a daily newspaper published in Dutch language. By the way, he was one of the neighbor of my professor at Murray College, Sialkot, who was at the time there in Netherlands and who taught me physics in Murray College. In this slide, you can see from left to right, Mr. Frans van der Wielen, I, and Dr. Mohammed Asghar. Frans van der Wielen, who was chemical analyst in our lab, and Dr. Asghar, who was my friend since my high school, namely Qawmi High School, Sialkot in Pakistan, and who was mathematician. These both gentlemen were my consultants. In Dutch we call paranims, who could assist me to answer any question if I needed their help. In this picture, you see the Doctor of Science Degree Committee is being led to the Lutheran Church. In the front row, sitting are from extreme left, my ex-chief from Royal Search Laboratory in Amsterdam, my friends Asif, Mrs. Tia Hanif Ewan, and Mr. Hanif Ewan. By the way, Mr. Hanif Ewan was my class fellow at the University of Punjab in Lahore when I was doing Master of Science there, and also he was my hostel fellow where I was residing, and almost every day at least we met 2 times a day in the mess for our lunch and for our dinners in the hostel. In this slide are shown I and my paranym Dr. Asghar. Here I am reading some standard text in English language requesting the Doctor of Science degree to be awarded to me. I would like to mention that before that day I spent almost 4 weeks doing practice to read such text in Dutch language, but when I arrived here I was told I am allowed to read this text in English too. Anyhow, it seemed I wasted my some time in doing practice for nothing. In this slide, you can see Professor Dr. Hans Serfontein, who was also my co-referent, and he was the member of the Doctor of Science Degree Committee, which consisted of 7 members, is raising question to my thesis. By the way, I would like to state here proudly that during my first degree called doctoral with DRS title like doctorandus, I did 2 subjects with him, and also of course exams, which were organic photochemistry as well as aromatic substitution reactions. In this slide are shown some of the D.Sc degree committee members, namely Professor Dr. N.M.M. Neighboring, Professor Dr. W.N. Spakamp, Dr. K. Oli, Professor Dr. Hans Serferten, who is raising question from a thesis to me. And finally, Professor Dr. Theo J. de Boer, who was the chairman of the Doctor of Science Degree Committee. I would like to mention at this stage that I learned from Professor de Boer Mechanistic Organic Chemistry, and I also attended his class on Mechanistic Organic Chemistry, and of course I did exam for that subject when I was a student of my first degree called doctoral. In this slide are shown Frans van der Wielen, my paraname, I answering the questions raised to me, and D.Sc committee members, which are Professor Dr. Hitzinger, my promoter, guide and supervisor for my research work for this thesis, and Professor Dr. Neighboring. Here I am defending my doctorate thesis, providing scientific responses to the raised questions. In this slide are shown D.Sc committee members, namely Professor Dr. U.A. Theo Brinkmann, Professor Dr. Otto Hitzinger, Professor Dr. N.M.M. Neighboring, Professor Dr. W.N. Spakamp, and Professor Dr. Hans Serferten, still raising question to me. Now in this slide are shown 4 D.Sc committee members, which are Professor Dr. Brinkmann, raising questions on my thesis, Professor Dr. Hitzinger, Professor Dr. Neighboring, and Professor Dr. Spakamp, again from left to right. In this slide are shown Frans van der Wielen, paraname I answering questions, Dr. Anders Asgar paraname, and then D.Sc degree committee members which are visible at this stage, namely Professor Dr. Brinkmann raising question on my thesis, Professor Dr. Hitzinger, Professor Dr. Neighboring, Dr. Oli, Professor Dr. Hans Serferten, and Professor Dr. Boer. In this slide are shown some of the committee members, which are Professor Brinkmann, Professor Hitzinger, Professor Neighboring, Professor Spakamp, Dr. Oli, and Professor Serferten. In this slide is the view of the gallery of this church where the defense of my thesis was taking place. In the middle, under the light, you can see in the balcony sitting, which are visible, are Khalid Kari and his 2 kids, as well as Mrs. Frida Kari, with our Zishan Ahmed sitting in her lap. In this slide are shown Professor Dr. Spakamp in the middle asking me a question, and of course standing while asking me question. On his left hand are shown Professor Brinkmann and Professor Hitzinger. On his right hand side are shown Dr. Oli and Dr. Surferton looking towards the questionnaire. Now, after the end of 45 minutes defense, the gentleman with big stick shown here, who previously led the arrival of the D.Sc committee members, has returned back to the Luther's church. On his arrival, he announced and said that hurrah and time is over. However, I was allowed to continue to answer the last raised question. The committee members shown here are Professor Brinkmann and Professor Hitzinger, my promoter and guide. Here, I'm still answering the question. The gentleman with big stick still waiting. Then I will finish my answers to the last question. And when I finish, he will lead the committee to a private boardroom to discuss about my presentation as well as my defense of my thesis. Here I am still answering the last question raised by Professor Speckham, although the time for the defense of my thesis was already over. Here in this picture you can see Franz van der Wielen, my paranym, I still answering the questions, and Dr. Anders Muhammad Asghar, my paranym. Prior to the start to this question, last one especially, which was concerning to explain the mechanism involved in the photoisomerization of polychlorobenzenes discovered in my research work. Before I answered that part of the question, I said I was stopped to think about that aspect of my research, especially about mechanisms in the lab. But I thought a lot at home about the mechanism because no one could stop me at home. So at this stage, everybody started to laugh, including my paranym Asghar, as you can see from this picture. By the way, about this answer, later on, answer to such question was not included in my thesis because that was not in scope of environmental and toxicological research work. But later on, after about 1 year, I published another article covering the mechanism involved in the photoisomerization of polychlorobenzenes. Now in this picture you can see the Doctor of Science degree committee members are being led from Luther's church to the boardroom, which could enable them to reach a final decision in camera about my thesis as well my presented defense. Here, by the way, by camera I mean in secrecy. Here is another view of the D.Sc committee members being led from the church where my open public defense took place. Now we are going to cover the second part of the process of award of doctorate degree to me. And in this part we will see the process of awarding such a degree to me by the doctorate degree committee. So from now on, from slide 30 to slide 41, we are going to cover the pictorial ceremony of such process. At the end of the duration of the defense of my thesis, once again I want to state, this committee was led to the boardroom to discuss my thesis along with the defense given by me for reaching a negative or positive decision in complete secrecy. Here you can see we are waiting outside of the boardroom to hear some decision from the Doctor of Science degree committee. In this picture are shown Frans van der Wielen, I, Dr. Anders Asgar, Safia Sultana, Bhatti behind Asgar, and son of Nasr Ali. Now, finally, the Doctor of Science degree committee has opened a door and we were allowed to enter the boardroom. And in the picture you can see from left to right Professor Speckamp, Professor Nebrink, Professor Huizinga, Professor de Boer, Professor Serfontein, Dr. Brinkman and Professor Brinkman and Dr. Oli. Here is another picture of the committee members which are shown here are Professor Speckamp, Professor Nebrink, Professor Huizinga, Professor Boer, the chairman of the Doctor of Science degree committee, Professor Serfontein, Professor Brinkman and Dr. Oli. In the boardroom sitting are shown Mr. Ravi Sloth, first secretary at the Pakistan Embassy in the Netherlands, Mrs. Ravi Sloth, Safia Sultana Bhatti, my spouse. Standing in the back are Dr. and Mrs. Kees Lacher, Professor Dr. Peter Edenberg, Petra Bond, who is the daughter of Professor Dr. Peter Bond, and she is carrying our son Zishan Ahmed, and also some other guests are also shown in this picture. Here we see the committee members which are visible: Professor Speckamp, Professor Huizinga, Professor de Boer, Professor Serfontein, Professor Brinkman, Dr. Oli, and standing in the corner are unknown person Nafis Iqbal, Khalid Qari, Mrs. Frida Qari and their children. Here we see the committee member which are visible are Professor Professor Nebrink, Professor Huizinga, Professor de Boer, chairman of the committee, Professor Serfontein, Professor Brinkman, Dr. Oli. Standing in the corner are unknown person, two colleagues of Mr. Kuiper, who were representing Mr. Kuiper, who was at that time foreign police officer in nearby town Zaandam, where I applied for the first time for my student visa to study at the University of Amsterdam. Next to them are shown Nafis Iqbal, Khalid Qari, Mrs. Frida Qari and their children. By the way, you can see the chairman of the committee, Professor Boer, has raised his hand. Why? It is funny that at this stage everybody was standing except one person. That was me. I was still sitting. He pointed towards me, asking me, "You too need to be seen as standing." In this picture are shown committee members from left to right again: Professor Spackamp, Professor Nebring, Professor Huizinga, Professor De Boer, Professor Serfontein, Professor Brinkman, Dr. Oli. In the corner are shown some of our guests and my friends: Khalid Qari, Mrs. Frida Qari, their children. In this picture is shown Professor Huizinga, who was my guide, promoter, supervisor during my not only for doctoral degree research work, also for my D.Sc degree research work. Now he is reading some statements concerning about me. In this picture again from left to right are shown the committee members: Professor Spackamp, Professor Nebring, Professor Huizinga, saying some comments about me: Professor De Boer, chairman of the committee, Professor Serfontein and Professor Brinkman. In this picture you can see some committee members: Professor Spackamp, Professor Huizinga, still saying some comments about me, and Professor De Boer. Standing in the corner are unknown person: Nafis Iqbal, Khalid Qari, Frida Qari and their children. In this picture can be seen the committee members from left to right: Professor Spackamp, Professor Huizinga, Professor De Boer, the chairman of the Doctor of Science degree committee, and Professor Serfontein. In this picture you can see that Professor De Boer is holding a wooden hammer, which is frequently seen in the quotes shown in the movies and also in the real quotes. At this stage, Professor De Boer slammed the table with this wooden hammer, stating that I should be awarded the Doctor of Science degree, and which is shown in the front side of this table as a white paper with a big red seal. In this picture, sitting is shown Safia Sultana Bhatti, my spouse, holding our daughter Gul Bano, standing our first secretary at the Pakistan embassy from the left. In the Netherlands, Frans van der Wielen, next to him in that row. I from the extreme right at the third guest with glasses and mustaches is Dr. Anders Bert Kaiser, who is also medical practitioner, and other guests. In this picture are shown Safia Bhatti, my spouse, with our baby Gul Bano, and next to her in the right hand side is shown First Secretary at the Pakistan Embassy in the Netherlands. Then on Safia's back is shown Van der Wielen, I, Dr. Muhammad Asghar, as well as other guests. From the extreme right, third guest again with glasses and moustaches is my friend Dr. Bert Kaiser. Again on the table was lying the Doctor of Science degree with big red seal awarded to me a few seconds ago. Now we are going to start to cover the third part of the ceremony, namely reception given to all guests. And that part of ceremony is covered in the slides from 43 to slide number 60 in the form of pictorial description. By the way, after being awarded the D.Sc degree to me, I, my wife Safia Sultana Bhatti, our children Gul Banu and Zishan Ahmed, the first secretary of the Embassy of Pakistan in the Netherlands representing our ambassador, and Mr. and Mrs. Ravi Sloth, who were or just like our parents, stood in a line, and almost all guests walked to us to shake hands with us and to congratulate to us. Here are shown my wife Safia Sultana Bhatti, I carrying our daughter Gulbano, the first secretary of the Pakistan Embassy, and Mr. and Mrs. Ravi Sloth carrying our child Zishan Ahmed, standing in the row to accept congratulations from our guests. And first guest who came towards us was Professor Boer, of course the chairman of the Doctor of Science Degree Committee, and he is now seen shaking hand with me and congratulating us. In this picture you can see I carrying our child Gulbano, shaking hand with Professor Dr. Hans Surferton, as well the first secretary of the Embassy of Pakistan in the Netherlands, shaking hand with Professor Dr. Boer, chairman of the committee. Here we see at the extreme left Dr. Anders Roel Backhoff, Dr. Anders Monique Koren, next to them Frans van der Wielen, then Professor Hitzinger, Professor Nebrink, Professor Oli, Professor Brinkman with his back, and on the left hand in the front is shown son of Nasser Ali. Here we are being served with soft drinks and of course with other drinks. Here in this picture is shown when Dr. Chris Bangma was shaking hand with me. Now Dr. Bangma is Professor of Urology and Department Head at the Faculty of Health Sciences in Erasmus University, Rotterdam in the Netherlands. In this picture you can see Safia Bhatti, my spouse carrying our baby, daughter Gulbano, as well other guests. In this picture, we see from left to right Mrs. Shamim Zaroub with her back, I, Dr. Andas Muhammad Asghar, Safia Sultana Bhatti, carrying our daughter Gulbano, Khalid Kari, D.Sc. Hoffman, a priest with side pose. In the very back, Mrs. Carla van der Berg, in the front now on the left corner, and her spouse with his back and their kid, and in the extreme right with half picture Miss Patricia from Trinidad, of course many other guests. Here we see Mrs. Shamim Zaroub with her back, I, Khalid Kari, Nasr Ali and his son and few other guests. Here we see Mrs. Patricia from Trinidad with her back on the left hand side, her spouse on the extreme left, Mr. Van Berg in the front and other guests. Here is shown are shown Hanif Evan, Mrs. Tia Hanif Evan with her back talking to my friend Hanif, of course with her spouse, and others are Dr. Kesoli, Professor Brinkman with back, and in the extreme right hand on the back is shown Mr. Asif from Pakistan, my friend. In this picture you can see from the left hand Mr. and Mrs. Roemer, parents of my friend Eric Roemer. They are talking with Mrs. William, who was the spouse of my friend Mr. Willem. Also can be seen in the front Dr. Andas Muhammad Asghar. Next to him, a guest student from Sierra Leone, D.Sc. Hoffman, a priest, and few other guests. In this slide, we have included pictures of some guests, which are from the left, from the front, First Secretary at Pakistan Embassy, next to him Nasser Ali, then I in the middle carrying our baby, Dr. Gulbano, Anwar Gauri and few other guests. Here are shown my friends Asif, Nafis Iqbal, as well Dr. Wong from other labs in our university and few other guests. Here can be seen a glass blower, Dr. Wong, Hans Weaver, who run my several research samples on the GCMS, and few other guests. By the way, the glass blower shown on this picture made many lab equipments from glass for me, which were very useful for my research work and which were used to gain some research work results. Here we see Professor Dr. Peter Bourne in the middle, my ex-professor in physics in Murray College, Sialkot, Pakistan. with his hand on the back of Dr. Muhammad Asghar and few other guests. This picture is from Mrs. Nasr Ali and her children. Here we see in the front Dr. Frank Gobas, I carrying our Dr. Gulbano, Dr. Asghar, unknown guest on the right hand. In the back, visible, and in the left hand, brother of Mr. Eric Romer, who was a lawyer. Then next to him, behind Dr. Gobas, can be seen Dr. Monique Kukelkoren, who was psychologist. Then we also see Dr. Theo Rotier, an historian. Behind or on the left hand of Mr. Asghar. Also seen on the right hand next to the unknown person is Mr. Eric Romer, and of course there are a few other guests. In this picture we can see Mrs. Shamim Zaroub, Mrs. Zora Gauri, Safia Sultana Bhatti, my spouse, Anwar Gauri, and few other guests. Here are shown Mrs. Zora Gauri, Safia Bhatti with our baby's son Zishan Ahmed and Mrs. Ravi Sloth. Now we are going to start the fourth part of the ceremony, which is entitled Dinner with some selected close friends, colleagues and family members. So from slide number 62 to slide number 79 covers the pictorial ceremony of such part of this process, of course, which was given to some selected close friends, colleagues and family members in a Pakistani restaurant located in the city center of Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And here is the picture of that Pakistan restaurant where the dinner to some guests was given. In the Pakistan restaurant is shown Mr. Nasr Ali feeding his baby child. Here my friend Anwar Gauri is holding my doctorate degree, which was awarded to me about 2 hours ago. Next to him is sitting Mrs. Zora Gauri. Here my friend Dr. Asghar is holding my doctorate degree. On his left hand is Mr. Nasr Ali carrying our Dr. Gulbano. On the right hand, me, I, and carrying our son Zishan Ahmed. In the first row of this picture can be seen Mrs. Frida Kwari with our son Zishan in her lap, Gulbano, our daughter, carrying a glass of Coca-Cola, Safia Sultana Bhatti, my spouse, I, carrying a glass of Coca-Cola, of course, just like my daughter Gulbano. In the second row can be seen Mrs. Shamim Zaroub, Mrs. Zora Gauri. In the third row are shown Mr. and Mrs. Ravi Sloth Anwar Gauri. In the right hand corner can be seen son of Mr. Nasr Ali. In the first row of picture are shown Mrs. Frida Kari, Safia Bhatti, Gulbano, our baby daughter, I. In the second row, Mrs. Ravi Sloth Anwar Gauri. In the right hand lower corner, Khalid Qari. Here, Pakistani appetizer as a part of the dinner is being served. And here Gulbano was wondering that where that plate would land. In this slide can be seen Mrs. Tia Hanif Awan with Zishan in her lap. Next to her, Hanif Awan, son of Nasr Ali. Nasr Ali in the back. Mrs. Dr. Peter Bourne, again Pakistani appetizer being served. Mr. Ravi Sloth and other guests. Khalid Qari, Mrs. Frida Qari, Mr. Ravi Sloth, Mrs. Ravi Sloth are shown in this picture. Here you can see Safia Sultana Bhatti, my spouse, Gulbano, our daughter, I, Hanif Awan, Mrs. Tia Hanif Awan. Mr. Ravi Sloth, Mrs. Ravi Sloth, Anwar Gauri, Mrs. Zohra Gauri, Mrs. Shamim Zaroob are shown in this picture. The round box in red color shown on the back of this table is containing my Doctor of Science degree. Here we can see Mrs. Peter Bourne, Professor Dr. Peter Bourne, Frans van der Wielen next to him, Professor Dr. Otto Singer, my promoter and guide, and next to him sitting in the front is Mrs. Frida Otto Hitzinger with her back. Here are shown Gulbano, our daughter, Safia, with our baby, Zishan, I, Mrs. Zohra Gauri in the back. In the middle row here are shown Khalid Qari, Mrs. Frida Qari, Gulbano, our daughter, Safia, my spouse, I. In the upper row visible are Mrs. Zohra Gauri with her back, Anwar Gauri, and in the lower row Mrs. Nasr Ali and Nasr Ali. Here are shown few other pictures from other guests. In the middle row are shown Khalid Qari, Mrs. Frida Qari, Safia Bhatti, with our son Zishan in her lap, I. In the upper row visible Anwar Gauri, in the lower row Mrs. Nasr Ali, Hanif Awan. Here can be seen in the front Mrs. Frida Otto Singer, Anita van der Tuin, who was office secretary in our lab and who typed a lot of manuscripts from my articles. Next to her is sitting Dr. Anders Asker. Frans van der Wielen in the back is I, Hanif Awan, Mrs. Tia Hanif Awan with their back. Here we can see Mrs. Tia Hanif Awan, Safia Sultana carrying our son Zishan Ahmed. It seems they are ready to leave because Zishan is carrying some light coat to be careful from Dutch cold. Here you can see in the upper row Dr. Muhammad Asghar, Mrs. Peter Bourne, next to her Professor Peter Bourne, then Frans van der Wielen. In the lower row with back Anita van der Tuin, Mrs. Frida Artooj-Singer, Professor Artooj-Singer, who was of course my promoter and guide. Now we are going to start the last part of this ceremony, and its title is Celebration Party Given to All Guests. From now on you will see from slide number 81 to slide number 108 we will cover the pictorial ceremony of the celebration party given to all guests. This function was held in the party hall located in the ground floor of the mathematics building situated on the Ruterstraat in Amsterdam, belonging to the University of Amsterdam. In this picture we see in the right hand row spouse of Dr. Wang, next to me I, Professor Dr. Peter Bourne, others left hand row from the front, left hand row from the front, Dr. Anders Jacobus P. van Meulen, Dr. Wang, sitting visible on the right hand side, Mrs. Wilma Woods-Fiss and few other guests. Here visible is Professor Dr. Martin van der Berg, Dr. Anders Muhammad Asghar, I, and some unknown guest. And here I am explaining something to Professor Martin. Here are shown Professor Dr. Martin van der Berg, several students, other guests, enjoying their drinks and music, of course. In this picture we can see in the first row, Dr. Anders Monique Koren, Dr. Anders Muhammad Asghar. Second row, Dr. Anders Roel Backhoff, Mr. Eric Romer, again with spectacle. Mother of Mr. Eric Romer. In the extreme right hand can be seen father of Mr. Eric Romer talking with Professor Dr. Peter Edenberg on the extreme right of this picture. Here in the first row sitting are shown Mrs. Wilma Woods-Fiss, John Fiss. In the second row are shown Mrs. Frida Kari, Mrs. Shamim Zaroub, Safia Sultana Bhatti, my spouse. In the third row are Dr. Anders Theo Rotier, Dr. Anders Roel Kokelkoon with her back, and brother of Mr. Eric Romer. As well as in the picture you can see Mr. Backhoff. Here Frans van der Wielen is making some announcements about the details of the stage program to be shown later on. Here still Frans van der Wielen is announcing the program, and few musicians are sitting waiting for him to finish. In this picture Frans van der Wielen and some graduate students are playing music On the back and in the front, other graduate students are dancing and singing. Here is another similar picture of students singing and Frans van der Wielen and other students playing music on the back. Again, another view of that picture is shown here. Again, Frans van der Wielen on the back and few other students are playing music and other graduate students are in the front who are singing. Again, similar picture of the graduate students singing in the front and Frans van der Wielen in the back and other students are playing music. In this picture can be seen from the left to right Mr. Ravislot, Khalfkari, Asif, Nasr Ali and his son. In the right hand row can be seen Mrs. Zora Anwar Gauri with her back and Anwar Gauri. In this picture are shown some other guests and several other students and colleagues from a lab. In this picture, in the front row can be seen Mr. John Fish. In the second row can be seen Mrs. Wilma Woods Fish, as well as few other guests, namely Safia Sultana Bhatti, my wife, Mrs. Farida Kari, Mrs. Tia Hanif, Evan, and Dr. Anders Hedi Abraham. Here some graduate students are singing songs to make fun of me. Again, they are still making fun about me and singing. Similar fun making about me and Frans van der Wielen playing music are shown on this picture. In this picture, Dr. Anders Jacob Peter van Meulen is playing music and singing. Again, graduate students in the front are singing, in the back Frans van der Wielen and few other guests are playing music. Similar picture of playing music by students and playing music, singing by the students and playing music by Frans van der Wielen are shown here too. Again, in the front the students are singing, in the back Frans and other students are playing music. At this stage of this ceremony, Frans van der Wielen is handing over to me a gift on the behalf of my colleagues in our lab. Here, Sophia and we are walking from the stage. Sophia is holding flowers given to her as a gift and I holding my gift. In this picture, I am thanking to my colleagues for the gift and also for all the guests since afternoon till this point for participating in my all 5 ceremonies, and I am very thankful to all of them. In this picture, in the front row, I looking at Parker pen, a gift from colleagues, Safia Sultana Bhatti with me, and in the second row in the back are shown Anita van der Tuin, Mrs. Frida Artoisinger. In this picture are again shown me holding my gift with open box, Sophia standing next to me, and on the back are Mrs. van der Tuin and Mrs. Hutsinger. By the way, I would like to mention at this stage of this ceremony that earlier Sophia tried to snatch this pen, a gift given to me, asking me, let me show this pen to the public. But I refused and I did not let her, and she tried to snatch from me, but she did not succeed. So everybody, including Sophia, are laughing. In this picture in the middle, I, and on the left, Franz van der Wielen is explaining to me how to use this gift, which is Parker pen, and on the right hand is holding Sophia, the box of my gift. Finally, I would like to request to all the viewers of this presentation, please do also visit IUSOM website, which is shown here, and that is www.international-schoolofmedicine.org. I want to say thanks for viewing this presentation. My contact address as well as my telephone number, fax number and email are shown on this slide. Once again, thank you very much for your slide, and goodbye and have a nice day.